Okay, well, welcome to everyone. I'm Randy May, president of the Free State Foundation. I've seen many of you at Free State Foundation events before, but I also see a lot of new faces, and I'm glad you're here with us as well. This is a special milestone, of course, for the Free State Foundation, and I'm really grateful that you're here to share it with us. I make no bones about saying that I'm proud of what the Free State Foundation has achieved in 5 short years, and they do seem very short in a lot of ways. On some days, it seems like a long, long time ago. But I think by all accounts, at all measures, the Free State Foundation is one of the nation's leading free market think tanks promoting not only free markets, but property rights and rule of law principles, especially with respect to the communications, internet, and high-tech sectors. We could not have accomplished all that we have accomplished without the dedication of our staff, our adjunct fellows, our members of our board of academic advisors, some of whom you're going to meet later this morning, and of course our many friends and supporters. There have been a few things that have been consistent throughout the history of the Free State Foundation. One is that when we do events, and we've done a lot of them now, there's about an 80% chance that it's going to rain that day. I've learned that. So the farmers and their groups have become some of our most loyal supporters and constantly asking me to schedule more Free State Foundation events. But I think it may be holding off for a while. So in the very first blog posted on the Free State Foundation website in June 2006, we're actually about 5.5 years old now, I wrote this, and I'm quoting. Winston Churchill once said, "Nothing is so exhilarating as to be shot at without success." Fortunately, I have no firsthand experience in that regard, that is being shot at, but it is exhilarating to engage with vigor day in and day out in the battle of ideas to promote, as we say on our website, understanding of free market, limited government, and rule of law principles. When I went back and looked at the blog, by the way, and looked at June 2006, by the way, there were about 8 blogs that we did in June. And other than the one in which I quoted Winston Churchill, I think about 6 of them were about net neutrality. So that was an issue that is with us, was with us for a long time and still is. So throughout the hard work and the worries about this or that going wrong, and so it has indeed really been an exhilarating 5 years. Despite the successes, however, there's much more work that remains to be done. It's in the nature of our governmental system that there always will be more work to be done, and this is especially so with regard to communications policy. But with the ongoing weaknesses in the nation's economy and the jobs picture, there's absolutely no doubt in my mind that the free market-oriented policies that we advocate are needed now more than ever. This is particularly true in communications and information services and the media sectors, where competition has now become the norm, not the exception. So we look forward eagerly to the next 5 years, and we know that every day won't bring victories, but we know, and this is most important, that with your support, we will continue to have many successes, continuing to influence policy in a way that is good for the country and good for American consumers. So thanks again for sharing our anniversary and for your friendship. So we're going to move now right into our program, and everyone should have a brochure, and you see the agenda. And it's now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, our opening keynote speaker. And that, of course, is Senator Jim DeMint. Now, Senator DeMint was elected South Carolina's 55th senator in 2004, and he's currently ranking member of the Senate Subcommittee on Communications, Technology, and the Internet, which is of special interest to many of us here, of course, because it has jurisdiction over matters relating to communications and is responsible for oversight of the FCC, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and NTIA. Now, as all of you also know, apart from his expertise and leadership in the communications area, Senator DeMint is an important voice on national affairs, for example, especially on tax spending and budgetary matters and regulatory reform matters in general. In November 2010, Senator DeMint was renamed chairman of the Senate Steering Committee, which is comprised of the majority of Republican senators and works to advance conservative legislation. And he also serves on the Senate Committee on Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs. He received his BS degree from the University of Tennessee and an MBA from Clemson University. And before engaging in politics, he owned a market research firm, which is probably a pretty good background and training for what he does now. Now finally, I want to add on just sort of a semi-personal note, and again, I think many of you know this, but back in 2005, Senator DeMint introduced the Digital Age Communications Act bill, which was modeled after some legislation that I, along with my colleagues, a bunch of colleagues, put together. And simply put, what that act would have accomplished, which we called DACA, what DACA would have done would have changed the communications law paradigm to comport with today's competitive realities in the digital marketplace. And Senator DeMint dropped that bill back in 2005. I think that's what they say. He'll drop that bill. And to me, that was just an early indication. I guess I had other early indications as well as to his farsightedness, intelligence, and understanding, really, of the communications world and how it was changing. So, Senator DeMint, I'm very pleased to have you here today to open the agenda.
Randy, thank you. So when I take your idea and introduce it, that makes me pretty smart, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay, we'll try that again. But thanks for being here, and good morning to everyone. I'm excited to be with any group that's out there fighting for freedom and the rule of law and free market. So I appreciate this critical mass of brains and hopefully action to help us in this fight, because there really is a fight, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that today. My background is communication. My BS from Tennessee was in communication. I spent most of my life in advertising, marketing, working with the media, but this was old school communication. Today it's really totally different. And I do want to focus on communication, but also on some of the other principles that you stand for. We've been thinking a lot about Steve Jobs in the last week, and there are not too many people here old enough to realize it was not necessarily just the creation of the iPod and the iPad and the iPhone. It was the personal computer, in effect, the individual computer. When I was finishing up college at the University of Tennessee, there was one computer on campus that filled a whole basement about this size. If you wanted to enter data, I see some of you smiling, you went and spent several hours typing in each data point on a card. And then you put this whole stack of cards in this feeder, it fed in, and then it would print you out the results. One dangling Chad could screw the whole thing up. And you had to go back through the cards and find out what, I mean, it was terrible. And only PhDs could operate them, and only huge companies could have them all together. People don't really realize. I mean, I started my career, we didn't even have word processing. We were in advertising, all of us had typewriters. And after a few years, we got one word processor that if you wanted anything typed in and had some memory that could be changed, you had to go and wait in line for this one person to type it in. But Steve Jobs kind of changed the whole idea from an institutional communications or computing paradigm to one that was very personal. That we created, or he helped create, an individual market where millions of people were making their own decisions about buying and operating. Eventually we had hundreds of competitors competing for their business, and it changed the paradigm of the industry. And that, along with deregulation of the telephone industry, where we had the same black phone sitting in our house for 20 years with almost no changes. Once it was deregulated, the changes just occurred almost immediately. And today what we have is an incredibly individualized communication market that's going to change so rapidly over the next 5 years. This conference is very timely. As you look ahead the next 5 years, what will be the communications law? I can guarantee you it's going to be the fight of the century as to which way we go. Whether it is in effect a government managed competition, or if it's a free market competition where you just have rules and regulation as a framework instead of an operative management force. And that's really what we're dealing with now as we look forward. The telecom industry, the communication industry, what we see on the internet and iPhones, all this other technology is really a showcase of how free enterprise works, how innovation and entrepreneurship just flourish when you have people developing ideas for millions of people who can make their own individual decisions. And that's what creates vibrant economies. When you've got competitors, millions of people making their own decisions, that's what the American economy is all about. But that's what's in jeopardy today as we look at a new regulatory structure and different paradigms, different beliefs altogether in Washington about how this country should be operated. And it's really not partisan as far as Republican and Democrat. It's really polar opposite views of the role of government and the role of a free society. That's what we're dealing with now. And I think that's why your role is going to be critically important, to be advocates for free market principles over the next 5 years. Because if you sit in some of those hearings, and as I do, you realize that some of the people talking see communications as a government utility, something the government should operate, something the government should manage. And there's a real bent towards the managed competition, managed economics, not only on this committee, but just about every committee, and I think sitting in the White House today, is a real belief that the government can macro and micro manage economic functions. I mean, you don't have to look too far into history to realize that government has never operated any economic function efficiently or effectively. And it's just, that is our threat right now as we look at how they want to regulate this industry as well as many others. Most of the companies, businesses that walk through my office today come in with their first complaint related to regulation. And the lack of certainty, the lack of predictability, the cost of new regulations. Of course, the EPA is the main culprit, but the FCC is clearly a threat. And we have to decide as a country which way we're going to go. Is it going to be a managed economy, or are we going to set up a structure where we can have free market competition there? The DACA bill was one of the, I think, a template, an example of how we need to operate the regulatory structure, not to attempt to manage economic functions within a particular industry, but to in effect be a watchdog if there is damage or harm done or there's an anti-competitive activity going on. We go in and address it rather than create a structure that's so rigid that it's very difficult and expensive to operate, very punitive to operate. That's what we have now, is we don't have a regulatory structure that's designed to help companies operate, but basically to sit back and penalize because you can't follow the multiple rules and regulations that exist right now. And I think we need to take this idea and continue to push it over the next 5 years, because if you think about it, we can't even conceive of what the communication industry is going to look like in 5 years. And if we try to manage it, if we try to standardize technologies, if we try to say this is how this part of the spectrum has to be used, what technologies, we're going to get ourselves so knotted up that we're going to miss opportunities. If we continue to expand the Universal Service Fund, where we're picking winners and losers and we're funding bad business models, and if we continue down that road, we're going to stifle the opportunities that are out there. Because of things like, if you look at cable and direct TV, we have advocates now who want to write a law that mandates a la carte programming, that consumers can buy a la carte program. Well, by the time we get that passed and the rules written in regulations, people could probably get any program they want on an iPhone anywhere in the world, anytime they want. And we're probably going to see the whole broadcast and industry completely change, as people are going to be able to order whatever programs they want anytime. It's going to be streamed not from cable or direct TV, but over their internet. And that's just one idea of many that we're going to see the industry totally change. But that's where this brings it home to what you're talking about. We cannot predict, and if we try to create a structure for what we know today, we're not going to have the innovation and the competition that we could have in this industry. And I hope the industry will continue to be a showcase for many others of how, if we keep the market operating in a free enterprise fashion, again, where millions of people are making their own decisions and you've got lots of competitors competing for that business, and the government's not picking winners and losers and giving grants to one company and not the other, trying to prop up bad business models, we have to again decide as a country, do we want to let freedom operate, protect property rights, protect people's right to innovate and do business? But what we've got is totally different now in the power in Washington. We've got a president and his National Labor Relations Board that's trying to decide where companies can locate. And you can't build a plane in South Carolina if it's right to work. And we're really invading almost all areas of the economy, picking winners and losers with Solyndrum and others. And when you've got a solar industry that's developing and growing based on market demand, and we come in and try to supersede that with government wisdom. So what I'm here to ask you about today, and hopefully get some of your comments and questions, is to help us to advocate for really what you're set up to do, for a free market model where we don't say regulations are bad, but what we need is a predictable framework of law and regulations that companies can compete in. We're not picking winners and losers. We're not saying what kind of technology has to be used here. We're not trying to control networks or content, within reason, obviously. But we're going the opposite direction from what we've got now in government. And so that's what I'm fighting to change. And if we can continue to hold up the picture of the industry and how it's succeeded, because it's gone so fast we couldn't regulate it. We couldn't figure out where it was going. And by the time we tried to grab it and write rules for it, it was somewhere else. And that's the only reason I think it's survived the heavy hand of regulatory structure. So Randy, thank you, and I really appreciate the work you've done to help us not only with DACA and the Freedom for Consumer Choice Act, which we call the FCC Act, and the other things that we're working on. I'm hopeful we can minimize the damage over the next year and a half, get a new majority in the Senate, and maybe a president that can really open up this industry with the opportunity that we really have. So why don't we take some questions and comments, and anything is game.
Senator DeMint, thank you very much, and we appreciate, I'll just reiterate what I said before for any of the latecomers, we appreciate the work you're doing to advocate the same type of free market policies and rule of law principles that we are at the Free State Foundation. So I hope you'll keep convincing more and more of your colleagues as we go along, and we'll be trying to do our part. So Senator DeMint has kindly invited questions or even comments, I heard him say. So we've got a mic in the audience. Raise your hand and see that Adam Bender Daly has already grabbed the mic, and that's a good thing. By the way, he never reminds me. He's one of the crack reporters for their communications daily, and we always appreciate his reporting. Adam, it's yours.
Thanks for asking the question. Senator DeMint, you're a co-sponsor of the joint resolution disapproval under the Congressional Review Act, despite the net neutrality rules of the FCC. So, can you just tell us a little bit about what the next steps are for that, and also if you think you can convince enough Democrats to come aboard to pass that resolution?
Yeah. Well, I'm not optimistic we can get the Democrats to help us here. Unfortunately, we have some players in the industry who are advocating for net neutrality, and that's a great example of how we're misusing the regulatory structure. We really don't have any harm that's been done. I think they say there might be one case, and that was dealt with. But they're trying to use what might happen as an excuse to regulate the networks themselves. And what that does to investment is, I just don't think too many of the folks I work with really understand, once the government starts controlling it, what that does to the investments that are actually going on. So I'm not optimistic we're going to get Democrats to help us. Frankly, they are all about central control and central power. There may be a few who talk a good game, but when it comes to voting, they're not there. We're going to continue to try to convince them, and there's some in maybe more conservative states up for election that might help us, but we're going to try, but I'm just frankly not optimistic, because I've had so many conversations where I thought we've got someone with us, and they go talk to their leadership, and they come back and something just zips them up. But I mean, the bigger problem is centralized control. A lot of that has to do with some of the other, I guess, supporters of the Democrat Party right now. I don't want to be overly partisan, but there is a kind of a polar opposite view of how America should work. And the example I use a lot is people say, well, go cooperate, compromise, and work with the other side. And that would be like a coach telling a football team to go out and work with the other players, try to compromise with them, see if you can help them out, because they have opposite goals. Our goals are free markets, free people. The other side right now is they want centralized power, and that has a lot to do with, I think, the support groups that are behind them.
Okay, another question. I see Lynn Stanton from PR Daily, so while she's waiting for the mic, I should say she is every bit the Cracker Jack reporter that Adam Bender is for TR Daily. So, Lynn, thanks for being here.
Okay. You're having a hearing this afternoon on universal service in the Senate Commerce Committee. What are you looking to hear from them, given that the FCC is already poised to take action? What are you going to hear, what kind of activity can you affect to influence it at this point?
Well, I don't know what to anticipate. I think we just want to continue to bring up the issues that we're concerned about and try to get FCC, others on record in the administration of what they're going to do and not do. Again, try to create some certainty and predictability. But the only way to slow down the regulatory process right now is just maybe just to try to shame them into stopping what they're doing, to try to get them to stop and think, because we know they generally see this as a public utility, and it's their job to manage it, not regulate it, but manage it. And so I don't know what to expect, but we'll just be working on our questions, and I don't know how many will be there. There's several hearings today. There's one on the EPA that Rand Paul is doing, and as well that has some property right issues involved there, Randy. But so I know that's not a very specific question, but we're not sure of the outcome, but we just want to get those issues in front.
Okay. Yes, this gentleman. Well, just wait for the mic, and I should have identified the others. If you'll identify yourself, please, for the record, we're transcribing this.
Eric Hagerson, T-Mobile. Senator, as you were talking about the need for how communication will change, you download or downstream videos to your iPhone, a lot of that is going to require additional spectrum. Many stakeholders are trying spectrum crisis, and the National Broadband Plan put together by the FCC identified the need for 300 megahertz in 5 years and 500 in 10 years. It's been about a year and a half since that was announced, and not one single megahertz of new spectrum has been introduced to the market. And quite frankly, I don't think we're going to see 300 in the next couple of years, maybe the next 10 years. So A, what are your thoughts about the need to get new spectrum out there? And B, what do you think needs to be done to be able to get it out there quickly enough?
Yeah. First of all, the use of spectrum, as I mentioned before, has got to be kept flexible, and we can't say that certain types of technology, certain uses in different spectrum, because we've got to allow that to grow and change. Certainly there need to be some set-asides for emergency and first responders, but I think we can do that within private sector ownership if we're smart about it, and keep more updated networks for first responders to use. I think you will see more spectrum auctions, and the reason is we're such dire financial straits as a country. We're seeing that as a pay-for in a lot of the proposed legislation is to sell spectrum. But what we have to make sure is there are not so many strings attached. And again, as the government sells it, they see it as their property, and they're looking at it as leases, and it becomes a government utility. And that's what we have to avoid. If we're going to sell it, we have to create freedom for its use, and make sure that we don't allow the spectrum to be sold where we're picking winners and losers in the market and deciding on technology. But I think you'll see some sold, particularly after the next election. I think you're going to see some changes in Congress and hopefully a different view of what we should be doing.
Yeah, so Congressman Blackburn put her head in, so maybe if it's okay with Senator Nitt, we'll take one more.
Okay, that sounds good.
Question, and go to this gentleman in the back.
Accuracy in academia. This might sound like a comment, but it's actually a question. You said the solar industry is growing through market demand. Is it real?
It is. Wait, I missed part of that. The microphone was going in and out, so you're going to.
My voice is close. You said the solar industry is growing through market demand.
Mm-hmm.
Is it real, free of government props or anything else?
Well, I'm just basing that on some conversations I've had with people who've been in the solar industry for years, and basically what they told me was if the government would stay out of it, the industry would continue to progress as the market develops. But when they come in, when the government comes in and gives incredible amount of money to a company with a business plan that's not sustainable, it disrupts those companies that have been in the business for a while and are growing it. So I'm not suggesting I'm an expert on the solar industry, but just based on people who've been in it, they see it growing and developing where there's a real demand for it, and as technology improves. But if we go in and try to speed that up with incredible amounts of spending, we're going to have more of the Cylindrum type outcomes because you can't create a market that quickly. We can't subsidize it enough. So Randy, again, thank you. Thanks for all of your interest. We need outside support, advocacy. We need a lot of noise on the outside for what it is that has to be done in Congress. And again, it gets back to freedom, an individualized market, and just a reasonable, light-touch regulatory structure that deals when harm is done with the actors out there. So thanks for your advocacy, and we look forward to continue to work with you. Thank you, Randy.
Join with me in